We are seeing ARR multiples for category leader or follower or hypergrowth companies from 25 to 150 times ARR revenue.
How these companies are valued with a fraction of the amount of people that were needed.
The amazing thing about AI is it is both an accelerant for revenue and a dramatic tool to reduce operating costs. I would say these metrics, the SaaS metrics, are going to hold for another 12 to 15 months, and then we're going to see a radical change, and the discount for pure SaaS business is going to increase. You could have a great technology, but get lost in the noise that's out there. The market has moved very quickly to create a lot of
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of This is M&A. My next guest is the managing director at Telegraph Hill Advisors, where he focuses on helping B2B enterprise software companies in AI, data management, and process automation navigate complex M&A and capital raising transactions. With more than 30 years of experience, he's worked with emerging growth tech companies to achieve outcomes they never thought possible, often orchestrating exits to strategic acquirers like Salesforce, Commvault, Upland Software. Before Telegraph Hill, he held senior roles at Elantra and Bowen Advisors, and even founded his own firm, Stonebridge Technology Associates, where he advised high-growth technology companies across the U.S. and internationally. When he's not closing deals, you'll find him on the ice playing competitive hockey and heading to nationals every year. With that, everyone, please meet my guest, Bob Cronin.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be on your show. Really appreciate you having me today.
Bob, it's already impressive that you're playing competitive hockey. Those guys take a beating, let alone heading to nationals every year. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's great. It's still fun. It is high motivation to stay in shape. And, I'm still learning, which I don't know what that says about my earlier career. And finally, it's very therapeutic. It's one of the few times I'm not thinking about work or family. So I'll try to play as long as I can. So it's really been great so far.
Awesome. Well, listen, it's great to have you, Bob. Excited to dive into some of the topics that we're going to be jumping into. I think our audience is going to get quite a few golden nuggets from this episode. We're going to dive into a massive shift that's happening across the deal-making world, right? The new exit landscape, how AI is rewriting the rules of strategic M&A. AI isn't just transforming products, it's transforming exits as well, right? From the valuation models to the buyer behaviors. We're entering, I guess you could say, a new era where data, IP, and AI capability drive deal value more than traditional metrics ever did. And so what we're going to do is we're going to unpack what I'm going to call 3 golden nuggets today. Golden nugget number 1, AI is the new multiple driver, right? Why strategic buyers are paying for intelligence, not just revenue. We're going to jump into timing the exit in an accelerating market, right? How to read the momentum and know when to sell versus when should you continue to scale. And then we're going to talk about the founder's advantage, right? How smaller AI-driven companies are starting to outpace some of these giants in this M&A cycle. With that being said, we have a ton to uncover here, Bob. I'd love to get your perspective on where should we get started.
Yeah, it is changing so many things, and the pace of change is unprecedented. Just a little context, as I said, I focus on AI. I read 15 to 25 articles every morning just to try to keep pace. I could read 3 or 4 times that. And these are incremental, but fundamental changes. And we can talk more about it, but it's just mind-boggling how quickly it's changing. But maybe to set the stage in the context of valuation, we've been in the SaaS era for 25 years now, and there's a very well known set of metrics in terms of how you can look at how a SaaS company is performing across 10 to 20 different metrics, depending on how granular you want to get, and basically look at how they fall within the different quartiles. And as a kind of a prescribed way to assess valuation, total addressable market and industry verticals certainly make sense. But today, we're seeing that generally fall in the 6 to 8 times multiple range. I'm talking ARR revenue now for companies with strong metrics and, 30, 30% kind of 30-40 rule of 40 company type of profile, but there's higher variability around that. You'll see a wide range on that. On the upper quartile, you can get into 8 to 10 and even to the mid-teens. I mean, we were fortunate enough to sell a company in the mid-teens revenue last year. And I'd contrast that with what we're seeing in the AI world, which we can come back to.
Not to interrupt you mid-thought, but just to take a step back here for a second, PE firms, they tend to have a scorecard for SaaS companies, right? And you talked about some of those core metrics, and you touched on one or two, but what do those generally look like? What are some of those core metrics just for the listeners, for first-time founders, entrepreneurs wondering, hey, what should we really be paying closest attention to?
Sure. It typically starts with growth, ARR or revenue growth. It then moves to a check on gross margins. And what I mean by that is you typically see software or SaaS companies with gross margin 75 to 95%, depending on how they do some of their accounting. If it falls below that level, people start thinking maybe it's a customized solution in some form or fashion. And then it moves to classic retention metrics. So there's gross retention and net retention, and there's a robust set of data in terms of where you need to be on gross retention and net retention in order to fall into the higher levels of these quartiles and the metrics. And then you can get into customer acquisition costs, lifetime value, all kinds of different metrics that give you more of a granular look. And of course, if you're doing all that, but it's a very small market, you're not going to also be able to achieve. And I'd say there's one last thing is just in terms of size of company, you'll see different multiples ascribed to companies below 10 million, below 20 million. Then after you get to 20 million, it becomes a platform company potentially for a lot of the private equity and growth capital investors.
Makes sense. Thank you. Thank you. And you mentioned rule of 40, rule of 30, just for listeners. Rule of 30, rule of 40, it's basically your growth percentage and your EBITDA. You combine the two, and that's where you arrive at. And I think whether you're a rule of 40, rule of 30, or even rule of 50, depends on where you're at in the space, what you're doing, how competitive is that market, all those different variables kind of play into what you should be trying to drive towards, right?
Yes, exactly. And just to add another point to that, I would say it's weighted more toward growth. So you don't want to be a rule of 30 a company all based on your 30% EBITDA margin. And so it probably goes without saying, but investors, I'd say you can have very little earnings as a percentage, but a very high growth rate. That is probably more favorable because growth is the key.
Right. They want to know that there's some continued growth that can happen, and they can work on the EBITDA side. They could figure out how to drive that down. Very different.
Exactly.
Right. Perfect. Well, you were headed down a talk track, I believe, talking about some of the AI multipliers. I'll let you continue down that path.
Yeah, and as you said, it's changing so many things, business models, the traditional SaaS model at every layer, the revenue layer, the cost of sales layer, the operating layer. And it's kind of a wild west in terms of transformational markets and huge opportunities. So we are seeing ARR multiples for category leader or follower or hypergrowth companies from 25 to 150 times
Wow.
ARR revenue. It is mind-boggling.
I would love those kind of multipliers.
Yeah. And it varies, there's public markets, and those multiples for the most part we're seeing in the private, call it venture investor market. The M&A market, I'd say, is on the lower end of that. But it's also even affecting what we would traditionally think about as acqui-hire. So we can talk more about that, but it is a tremendous change in terms of what we're seeing for traditional SaaS companies that have a limited AI capability.
Mm-hmm. And what are you seeing? You kind of just hinted to it at the end there, unlimited AI capability. But what does that mean from, if you're looking to drive a premium, what are you seeing out there? Because it's hard to, you see a lot of AI companies. I mean, everybody, it's AI, right? And it's hard to see through what's real AI that's driving a premium versus what's just kind of noise or lipstick on a pig. right?
Right. Yeah. And
Um,
it's and that is a really key point. And whether you're a venture investor or a firm like ours focused on AI for emerging growth companies, trying to determine that because this level of innovation and change is happening both across closed systems, commercial, and then open source systems. And so depending in the big tech players are open sourcing parts of their platform. Microsoft quietly open sourced a big part of their agentic platform in October. So you can have a commercial model in that space. And if someone open sources their you could be out of business very quickly. So it's not solid ground. But in terms of the companies that are realizing those multiples, it's really the category leaders for the most part, and they're experiencing hyper growth. And just to pick a name, you may have heard of Lovable, but there's a huge disruption happening in the application development, software programming world, and whether you call it vibe coding or AI code generators, you can do amazing things now by coding the front end, the middle of the stack, and the back end with natural language prompts. And so Lovable, just to put in perspective, went from 10 to 100 million, and in the next year is now predicting that they'll be at a billion. So if you think of that, and that only happens when you're disrupting an entire industry, right? Which is why so much money is pouring in now. There's a huge fear of missing out, not only from investors, but governments and countries. So you see a lot of sovereign wealth money coming in. And there's only going to be a select number of winners in those spaces. So it is a true land grab, maybe what we saw back in the B2C, environment. But that's what driving that kind of, you have to experience that kind of growth. And cautionary tale for some founders is you have to make sure you know what you're getting into in that context, right? Because these are valuations that are incredible, in the billions for startups, a new company, and if you have to realize that growth or you're going to be under a liquidation preference, a very large liquidation preference. So just make sure you're aligned, and investors and other players are dealing with an N of 10 or 15 more bets or, on any fund. As a founder, you're dealing with an N of one. So you got to keep that in mind.
Well, what's interesting is just to hit on a couple topics that you kind of touched on lightly is one, it's how these companies are valued with a fraction of the amount of people that were needed. That's one, right? Because of AI. Two, someone like myself who's moved up through the rankings through sales and through go-to-market strategies and understood business, right? Not from a technology perspective or necessarily an engineering background. Now I can actually go found another company and write my own code because of these models. It's just amazing how advanced this is becoming.
It is, and it's there's two elements to that, right? You can get to market much faster on that basis. And just as an anecdote, I met with an AI company recently. The CEO was an engineer, and he said last year at this time he bids out kind of his lower level development work on a global basis, and he said he would give the vendor 4 weeks to respond to his project. And this year he's bidding it out on a 48-hour basis. And he's got agents talking. He requires that vendor have an agent that his agent can talk to. So when he's sleeping, he gives feedback to their agent. And he paid $100 for that project.
And it
So
saved, so much time.
think of that disruption, right?
Yeah.
So
We use it internally here at ShareWalt for that exact purpose. We'll get an RFP and RFI that's, and our security guy will just run it through ChatGPT or run it through one of our agents, and it'll spit this thing out in minutes versus before it would take someone hours and hours, right? Filling this thing out. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing the change.
And then there's a whole question for existing companies for 25 years have built a great SaaS business, and we can come back to it later, but what is the way forward? How do they think about the choices? But the amazing thing about AI is it is both an accelerant for revenue and a dramatic tool to reduce operating costs. And if you can't, you've got to do both to stay competitive over time.
And that's why I feel like for ShareVault, we're lean and mean. We're a bootstrapped company. We didn't take on a bunch of outside capital to go grow and scale like gangbusters. We got to grow under our own, right? It's now an advantage for us being resource constrained because we don't have to worry about all those extra resources losing their jobs, worrying about replacing or displacing people. Instead, we're allowing people to take off their hat and not wear 5 hats. They can wear 1 hat and use AI agents to do a majority of the other work. What we're finding as a company is obviously being in the data room space. For us, our big claim to fame is going to be we plan to be the first data room or one of the first data rooms that actually has the ISO certification, so the security component behind it. Because what good is AI, right? If it's not secure, it's not protected, and you're not upholding the right standards.
And companies are going to have to find that, a competitive space where they can maintain that lead or moat. And in terms of layoffs and just cost reduction, you see what's happening in the market, and it's well publicized. Like Salesforce reduced their customer service group from 9,000 to 5,000, replaced them with agents, and the workload was the same, and the performance was slightly better because the agents are costing. So if you think of what they're looking at, the customer service agent, 50,000 to 100,000 a year, requires vacation, benefits, and sick days, and performance may be variable, and there's a whole bunch of training. When they get the agents right, it's 2 to 10,000 a year. So I mention all that as an example of some real world numbers as to how you think that the competitive dynamics are going to evolve both on a revenue generation side, but a cost side going forward.
Right. So because things are moving so fast, and because at the speed in which innovation can actually happen and companies can be spun up, how has that impacted the M&A landscape when it comes to when a founder should think about when they should be executing to exit? Because you could be late really quick, right? You could be first, but then you could be late really quick. All of a sudden you find 3 people, they're already, now you got 3 blessed buyers out there looking for what you have.
It's a great question. It's not an easy question. I mean, you have so many dynamics in play depending on where you fall in the ecosystem and your time frame. But just thinking of AI native and AI first as an example, there's some legal tech has been another space that is seeing tremendous disruption. So this company called Harvey AI is at 100 million in AR now, 80 times revenue multiple of their last valuation. But there's 140 companies playing in the legal tech space right now. Not old AI. This is new AI companies. So as you say, the tools and the code generators allow you to get into a space a lot more quickly. So in terms of how do you decide, I think you have to make an assessment as to, are you a category leader? Do you see continued growth? And again, bring it home with an example. Workday recently acquired a Nordic company called Sana, which was a leader in the agentic space. And not clear this data is exactly accurate, but they paid somewhere between 15 and 20 times ARR, depending on how you look at trailing 12 months or run rate. At the same time, Automation Anywhere, which is in the robotic process automation space, which I would say is a bit of a legacy solution right now, just acquired a company called Acera in the same agentic space for 6.5 times. So that comes back exactly to your point. Why does someone get 15 to 20 and someone else get 6.5? Their technology may have been just as strong, but maybe their growth slowed for some reason. So you've got to be really thinking about when the right time to exit. I think the paradigm and the challenge for traditional SaaS companies that are just starting to think about how to get to an AI footing, or whether that's a really difficult question. And I've never said this before, meaning that with a lot of clients, we'll tell them, hey, you should wait. The market's on grade. Before the last year, the previous 2 years, we would tell them that it's not a great time to raise money. It's not a great time to sell. You should grow your business. Now there's a whole new question, which is, as a SaaS business that maybe has not implemented AI because you may not have the resources of people, what do you do? And what's your time frame? I would say these metrics, the SaaS metrics, are going to hold for another 12 to 15 months. And then we're going to see a radical change. And the discount for pure SaaS business is going to increase. And so that's a key question. If you're out 24 to 36 months, you have to get to an AI footing. And there's different ways you can think about that depending on the size of the business. But again, to bring it home, uh, Adobe just announced its acquisition of SEMrush within the last, I think, 24 hours.
Oh,
SEMrush
wow.
is,
I missed that.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
That's huge.
$425 million publicly traded company, SaaS business. I would, from a distance, everyone's whitewashing AI. No matter what they're doing, you go to their website, it says AI. So trying to distinguish, I would say it was not an AI forward, AI native company, but it was wholly focused on search engine optimization, which is being disrupted to now it's answer engine optimization, right? So search engine optimization, the company's stock has dropped by over half from this year. Well, the market in generally has gone up. So Adobe paid 4 times revenue for SEMrush. And even they were growing 18 to 20%. Okay. So that we're going to see more of that. And there's more evidence in the public market. Chegg is a classic example of a company at one time that was selling for 21 times revenue is now selling for 0.2 times revenue. So there's some really important decisions that owners face, SaaS company owners face as they think about moving forward.
Right, right. That's interesting. And I didn't even catch that on the news. I haven't had a chance to pick up on that. That's an interesting acquisition for sure. Um, when just for the listeners, they're the ones that are struggling with, maybe they don't have the resource to implement AI, right? Because that could be part of it. I know we were strapped a bit, and so there was some jigging that we had to do to make it work and to get a real solid AI roadmap in place. There are vendors that are willing to give grants, depending on the idea and what you're working on. So just something for the listeners to be aware of, like AWS. I know they'll often have grants and special incentives because they're interested in growing what they can do with their AI capabilities. So,
Yeah, they'll provide very generous credits on the cloud platform, right? And so you should definitely explore that. And I would say for um, SMB, or if they're emerging growth SaaS companies that are, we focus on 5 to 25 million, but um, 5 to 50 million, very fantastic businesses. I mean, but they may not have, as you say, the resources or the capabilities to transition to an AI footing. This is very complicated. It's moving so quickly. But one thing to think about is that there are a bunch of vendors who are emerging who are providing a managed solution, not unlike the managed service providers that are voice over IP or other telecom solutions or internet solutions, storage, right, and compute. You can essentially offload the complexity to some of these parties. And I think it's a really interesting strategy there because there's so much complexity. It's changing so quickly. I think it's a really good path to explore for smaller SaaS companies as to how do you get to an AI footing quickly with limited amounts of capital. But again, that could be a whole nother session.
oh, for sure, that could definitely be a whole nother episode for sure. Well, let's shift back. We were talking about some of the metrics earlier, and some of the multiples earlier. Are there any AI specific metrics that I should be thinking about, our listeners should be thinking about that will be indicators to, how a valuation might go up or down?
I would say again for the category leaders, it's the size of the market that you're trying to disrupt, and it's evidence of any kind of customer traction, which again, coming back to the code generators is easier to create, right? Because if you think of another sector exactly opposite in mind, Industry 4.0 or industrial data management now, things don't happen quickly in that industry for a reason. But if you're trying to use Lovable or Replit or Cursor, your developers can, give them their credit card number and they're on the platform. So the sales cycle is a matter of minutes in some ways, right? So you can experience hyper growth. And again, that's this competitive sector there. But I would say the metrics are, um, that it has to be a large sector. You have to have something differentiated or a lead. And what investors, the new watchword among investors is durability. I hear it so much now. I see it as euphemism simply of, are you going to be around? Are you going to be able to compete? They're afraid to ask that question, but the durability, the other term I'm hearing is frontier firm, which is, we could come back to that, but it goes back to your reference of companies with very few employees and growing their business. The one area that I know can be problematic for companies is if they are basically developing an AI solution that is just a wrapper around one of the large language model solutions. And what I've heard is, hey, if you're just 2 or 3 API calls away from OpenAI or Anthropic, I don't see that as a defensive position or something that's sustainable, particularly given that both those parties are moving up the stack. So they've got the foundational models, but their AI, OpenAI is introduced an AI browser. Anthropic's moving into life sciences and financial and enterprise sales in a big way. So you could be competing, with your supplier very quickly. So that is what that's why there's so much complexity now, because even when we look at situations, we're having to determine, what is the mode around the AI, what are you doing differentiated, and I can talk about some of those things if we want to go there for smaller companies. How do they look at creating a differentiated solution, or what are the elements that are involved there?
Right, right. So you talked about the wrapper, right? Put in the wrapper and using open models to build your AI and etc. Are you still seeing multiplier improvements though as a result of that? Is there some sort of multiplier improvement, or is it generally kind of like, eh?
Yeah, it can be very difficult. If you're using it to reduce costs, I think it can be an effective strategy. With agentic AI is all about, leveraging LLMs to create agents that act autonomously, and that can have a huge effect. In fact, you need to get there on your cost structure to survive. On the revenue side, if your value proposition is just a couple of calls away from one of the large language models, it has to be in a sector that's highly regulated or with complex workflows. OpenAI is not going to easily walk into the insurtech space or the healthcare space that they may try, or the industry 4.0 industrial data management space. There are definitely barriers to that. So it really is a case by case situation. If a lot of sectors in MarTech are being disrupted completely at this stage.
Right, right. So just similar to that question about the wrapper, and then we'll start to shift obviously topics just because we got so much more to unpack here. But have you experienced a deal that blew up because it was more marketing hype versus actual AI reality?
We have worked on deals and one very recently where the company had a very interesting solution in the MarTech space, and everything's about using Gen AI and then agentic AI. The Gen AI gives you the front end, the natural language prompt capability, right? So you can you can essentially execute your workflow through natural language prompts that help facilitate whatever workflow processing. But the real the real work of getting things done comes from the agentic AI, where they can work autonomously to execute different parts of that workflow. And this solution had both of those, but it was early stage and in the MarTech space. So they launched their solution at the end of last year. They didn't have a lot of resources to put behind the marketing, but there is so much noise out there, and the development is happening so quickly that the catch up period can be six months or so, right? And so if you don't have distribution and if you don't have the resources, you could have a great technology, but get lost in the noise that's out there. And we've experienced that because when we looked at that opportunity, it was very exciting. It looked very unique and novel. And then, over the course of time, the market has moved very quickly to create a lot of confusion. And sometimes it's not that your technology's not great. It's just the customers don't know what to buy. There's so many options out there.
Right. So Bob, we actually touched on the topics that we planned to touch on, right? We talked about why smaller AI-driven companies are outpacing giants in the M&A cycle. We kind of lightly touched on that, but let's dive just a little deeper into that. What advantages are you seeing that small AI-first companies have in today's M&A environment that just, I guess, the bigger players can't match?
I would say it's characteristics that has been true for startups for some time, but I would say they're so much more nimble than the bigger companies. It's speed and time to market, and over time, I've often wondered why one of the bigger tech players didn't create this. The reason is that their development teams are working on projects. It's not like, and even now they don't have people sitting around saying, hey, okay, we got a new project. Some create innovation groups, but the startups can just move so much faster. I mean, they're
Yes. So
people
fewer red
coding.
tape. Yeah.
Yeah, pace,
Yeah.
and then they're not, tied down with any tech debt, meaning, there's an advantage to starting with a clean slate and being able to code that. And then because of what's happening, you know, with AI and the internet, you can start to generate traction, to create a viral following, right? And you don't need to spend a ton of marketing. I mean, Lovable, again, I come back to that. They were just signing up people because of word of mouth, whether it's chat groups or Reddit, whatever form you think about. People are like, you should try this, and that generates a lot of momentum. So once you get it going, then the investor money is going to see that and come in. And if you've got a lead, then they're looking to accelerate the leaders and the winners, the ones that are out front there.
Lovable is a real good example of product-led growth and how quick that went viral. People grabbed it, were able to pop in a credit card, cradle to grave, don't have to talk to anybody, log in, use it, figure it out really quick. They hit the nail on the head with that experience. And I'm starting to see an emergence of product-led growth companies as a result of obviously AI, right? Where there's almost no human intervention, even on the selling cycle of things.
Yeah, and just to give another example, I mean, we're seeing this. So you had mentioned earlier about, what's happening with the employee metrics. I mean, the word in the valley, or the paradigm in the valley is the first billion-dollar single employee company. Now, I think we're a long way from that, but maybe it's five. But BCG, just the Boston Consulting Group, just published an article about advising their CEOs of how to get ready to compete with AI only companies, essentially, if you're one or five. So, I mean, that reputable consulting firm was looking globally and saying, you need to start getting, ready for this dynamic. And so that, and on bringing it home, I recently had an experience here in Boston where someone reached out to me and said, hey, I'd love to, just get together and have you think about where we are. And I looked up the employee base on LinkedIn and saw that it was only 12 people. And I thought, okay, well, we talk to earlier stage companies all the time, just as a matter of course. And I said, well, this is a company that's not going to do anything for a couple, 2 or 3 years. But I met with them, and they are AI first, on both the cost and revenue side. 12 people. The revenue per employee is over $1 million each, well over 1 million, and their operating margins are 60% EBITDA margin. So now the venture investors are looking for rule of 50 or 60 companies, because you're using AI both on the revenue component and the cost component.
Yep. Yep.
So
It's changed.
that's a mind-boggling change.
Yeah. It's changed the landscape. I was reviewing an investor deck and it said 250 employees. But then I go to LinkedIn, it shows 4 founders. And so I'm having this conversation with this individual, and they said, our agents are our employees. That's I have an executive admin, I have an SDR, I have a this, a that, a this, a that, right? They're counting their agents as employees. Every agent is an employee to them.
It's fascinating. It's scary. My wife won't let me talk about some of this during dinner conversations, because I do have a dystopian view to some degree on some of the downsides to AI. But it's a strategic imperative. Hope is not a method. I've heard some people say, "Oh, it's not real. It's a bubble." That is not a winning strategy, and inaction is not a winning strategy. So it's at a point where companies need to decide. And obviously, I'm setting aside software vendors, all kinds of companies, whether you're a manufacturer or service, are trying to figure out what they do with AI.
Yep. I'm a firm believer here at ShareVault. I pushed it from day one. It's like we are going that direction. There's no question about it. We have to figure it out, whether, both from how we use it internally to how we develop it into our product, how we build our products, to what capabilities we're going to have. It's not a question of are we, it's we must. Otherwise you get left behind. Even in my hiring processes now, it's like if someone says, hey, I'm not at minimum, and this is minimum using ChatGPT and 2 or 3 other AI tools, it's almost like I can't hire you. I had this actual example in hiring a customer success person. I was like, I'm sorry. I loved our conversation. You have a lot of the great skill sets, but if you haven't adopted and started to use AI, you're getting left behind. And it's not just here, it's going to be anywhere you go. And my recommendation as a coaching back to her was like, hey, I would definitely go back and I would start researching the tools that you should be using, get familiar with them, start using them, so that you have a better buttoned up story around how you use AI to accelerate your business and what you do. Right.
You're exactly right. And then that's happening in every sector and every industry. And whether you like it or not, it's the reality. And it's from your size company to Accenture that, just announced publicly they're not going to be able to upskill some of their employees. And so they've had layoffs, but then they're all in on, using AI. And KPMG recently came out, it was quoted as saying, our junior staff that they're hiring, we're going to be hiring them to direct agents. So again, a whole nother session on implications for jobs and the economy and what that means. But there's no turning back at this point. It's
Yeah.
it's the reality.
Yeah.
Going
The
forward.
momentum is there. It's
Yeah,
going. It's just, are you jumping on or are you not?
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
the reality of what we're learning is that it's not going to replace people. And let me rephrase that. In some ways, it is definitely replacing people, but there's still a people element. It still needs to be managed by people. So again, that puts us in a great spot where if you're already resource constrained, it's just now these people get up leveled within our company and they manage these agents and they manage AI and they make sure that it's doing the right things. They fact check, verify, right? So our support will never be completely, AI support. There will always be some sort of human intervention, but now they're managing 30 chats and making sure what's going out is correct versus, one-to-one chats.
You're right. And I think I agree. There's going to be, from a holistic view, there's going to be fewer jobs, particularly at the entry level and the other end for people who, you know, uh, do not use the tools you're talking about. It's harder for them to transition for that. And so In the case of consulting firms, those are the people that probably, get retired early, frankly, unfortunately. So, but you're right. I think it's going to be critical to have a human in the loop, or that human oversight as
Right.
well.
Well, listen, we need to shift into a little bit about you. But before we do that, was there anything you wanted to bookend this conversation with on the AI front?
No, I think we've covered a whole bunch of it. I just come back to the one thing is this is a critical strategic imperative for every software business, and they have to decide again if they're not going to move to an AI footing. I think you need to consider selling within the next 12 to 15 months. It's a good M&A market now, and I've never advised the client of that before.
Yeah.
But the world is changing so quickly.
That landscape is changing. You got it. You hit the nail on the head for sure, Bob. Well, listen, Bob, let's talk about you for a split second here. We talked a bit about your background during the introduction. But let's talk about Bob before, when you were, when you were a kid, I guess, was there something that signaled that you can look back on where it's like, no wonder why I'm doing what I'm doing. When I was a kid on the playground, while all the other kids were doing the X, I was doing Y,
Yeah, it probably doesn't go that far back, but later in college and business school, there's always been a focus on entrepreneurs and founders, and I can tell you, I have tremendous amount of respect for people who have created businesses. I think it's an amazing thing, an incredibly challenging thing to do. I also came to learn that I was not an entrepreneur. I'm not a risk taker. I come from a family that are better advisors and counselors than the ones who take the risk. So my move into emerging growth companies was I get to live vicariously. I love meeting. Love, hearing about how they thought about the idea, how they built it, how they bootstrapped it, like your company. And then over time, I love tech because it's always changing. It's incredibly challenging and intellectually stimulating. And, with AI, it's incredibly difficult to keep pace. And as a caveat, I've never coded anything. I've never run a business. It's all from a financial perspective or an advisory perspective. But I would say that's been an overriding thing. I've had no interest in moving up to larger companies. I love working with the emerging growth, field. So that was a big factor in my thought process over time of what I want to focus on, and I love the intellectual stimulation of still learning, every day about the mind-boggling, unprecedented change here we're experiencing.
That's awesome. Listen, our listeners, I already know are going to enjoy this conversation that you and I had. And obviously, there were several topics that you and I surfaced that we kind of tabled because we could definitely dive deeper into those. And so I would love to invite you into another episode in the future. We can kind of do a continuance of this conversation. But until then, how can people get in touch with you, and why should people get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'd say the easy thing is you can go, as I said, I joined Telegraph Hill Advisors. The firm is based in San Francisco, but I'm here in Boston. My information's on the website, my email and phone number. So that's the easiest way. I'm also on LinkedIn. And I would say that we know where we play in terms of we like the emerging growth company space, and it starts at 4 or 5, but we've looked at some really interesting technology companies below that level that we know we can sell, or we think we can sell, the strategic advisors. And as I said before, even if you're early, you're not thinking about hiring an advisor for a while. We talk to those companies all the time. In any industry like ours, there's an ecosystem, and as you get above the 20-25 million-dollar level, even at that layer, there's 100 tech banks out there that will want your business. So one of the things that's key to us is a senior level attention. We're every deal is staffed with 1 or 2 MDs, and I think the real difference is the question for owners is, who is my first email go to? Is it go to the associate or the analyst? Does it go to the MD? With us, it always goes to the MD. And so that's why, and if you're, looking for people who know AI, we cover a number of different verticals. That would be say our pitch, and will be very straightforward. If it's not in a sector we know, we can help you find other banks or firms that are focused on those sectors.
Right. Perfect. And as you stated, don't wait till you're ready to make a deal happen. Get ahead of it is the advice I've heard from banker after banker and advisor after advisor. You want to get ahead of it. You don't want to wait till you're ready to go into deal making mode. You want to catch it much earlier if you can.
Yeah, that's a whole nother session on how to prepare for getting a preemptive offer is great, but not being ready to respond to a preemptive offer is a mistake. That's a planning mistake.
The rule is stay deal ready, right? Well, thank you again for joining the podcast. I really did enjoy this conversation.
This has been great. Thanks for having me, and look forward to come back anytime.
Definitely. So that's a wrap on another episode of This is M&A. See you on the next episode. Until then, stay sharp and stay deal ready.
If this episode sharpened your thinking, share it, post your take, follow the show, or drop a quick review and bring it into your next deal. We'll be back with more real talk from people who've been in the room when it counted. The views and opinions expressed on This is M&A are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect the views of any company or organization mentioned. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, financial, or investment advice. Always consult a qualified professional before making business decisions.